One of the largest deals I did was a $2.5 billion real estate M&A. Everything starts with a choice. So you can choose to either do something or become so fearful you're afraid of failing so you don't do anything. You can't do everything on your own. You need a great team, and you're only going to have a great team if you're a compassionate person and are sensitive to other people's needs and desires and wants. People should have in terms of what they're doing. And if they're not, they need to change what they're doing and how they're doing it.
900 million net worth, 8 billion in deals. He's the turnaround strategist billion-dollar companies call when everything's on the line. And today we'll run through 6 simple strategies that built his empire.
Welcome to Transforming the Game. It's such a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you.
So a lot of people would have heard of the name Hilton, but some might be wondering, who's this Mr. Hugh Hilton and what am I going to get out of listening to today? So what is it that we hope people can take away?
Well, one thing they can certainly take away is that I'm not associated with the Hilton Hotel family. So that's one thing, but doesn't mean I can't be interesting and fun. I actually have run a couple of their one of their prior hotels, which was a big, large casino that they owned up in Reno, and had a chance to chat with the Baron one day. That was interesting because when I called the office, they had no idea who I was. When I said, yeah, I'd like to speak to Baron. Well, who's this? Hugh Hilton? They go like, I could tell they had no idea. Whoa, this is some part of the family that we never heard of? So it was pretty
long lost uncle.
So today I think we're going to learn about how to leverage challenges and failures and to become a very successful business person.
I love that. And that's very important. Now, I have had the absolute privilege of learning from your wisdom when you do talk. As a gentleman who has done over 8 billion in deals, your net worth is very, very, very high. You are very successful and very smart, but you're also very humble. So that's why I was very excited to be able to share you with the world today. One of the things I took away from, we had a coffee conversation actually at a cafe. You happened to be getting a coffee one morning. And you said to me, one of my takeaway was go read the 4 agreements, which I promptly downloaded and listened to on the plane on the way back to Australia.
Oh, great.
So it was amazing, but I want to put that out to the world as well. So do you remember the 4 and how do you integrate it into your life and business?
Oh, it was huge. One of the largest deals I did in terms of a single deal was a $2.5 billion real estate M&A. And one of the agreements, which is don't assume things, played a critical part in the negotiation because I was worried that the person that I was negotiating with might have some ethical issues. So instead of assuming that and being on edge the entire time, what I did is I used the first C of the 6 C's that we've talked about. And I said to him, how would you like to negotiate this deal? And he goes, well, what do you mean? I said, well, we can either be ethical and transparent, or we could be deceitful and deceptive. I said, I can negotiate either way equally well. You choose. And so, of course, he says, well, I want to be ethical and transparent. And I said, great. I said, now, if I catch you slipping back into being a little deceitful and deceptive, I'm going to have to smack you around. He goes, oh, no, that'll never happen. I said, great. So, of course, we negotiate the framework of a letter of intent. And one of the provisions is I was going to take back some paper on this transaction, and I agreed that I would give him 1 3-year loan. So it comes back with 2 3-year loans. And so I called him up and I said, remember our discussion on how we were going to negotiate this transaction? He goes, yes, of course I do. And I said, well, since we agreed that there would be one 3-year extension and you put 2 3-year extensions in, I can only assume, since we agreed that we were going to be transparent and ethical, that your little pinky inadvertently slipped when you meant to hit 1 on the keyboard and you hit 2 by mistake. Is that what happened, John? And he starts laughing. He goes, okay, you're right. And I said, well, we're never going to have another discussion like this, are we? And he said, no, never. And I said, great. So we proceeded through with the negotiation. We got down to now documenting this in a purchase and sale agreement. And it was a very complicated transaction because it had a lot of different properties and loans and all sorts of things. I said at the beginning, I said, now I want to agree to one more thing before we get going on this, John. And he said, what's that? I said that we agree that we're going to have fun while we're doing this. He goes, fun? I go, yeah, fun. He goes, I don't know. I've never heard that in a negotiation concept. And I said, well, John, what I found is the larger the number of zeros in the transaction, the larger the probability of an asshole factor occurring. And he goes, I said, so, I want to make sure that doesn't occur. So let's just agree we're going to have fun. He goes, okay, great. And so we ended up becoming good friends, went through the whole transaction. At the end of the transaction, one of his investors backed out for $7 million. And so his analyst called my analyst and told my analyst what the problem was. And so I said to my analyst, I said, what do you think we should do? He goes, well, I think we should just add it to the loan balance that we're going to carry back. And I said, so that's your solution? He goes, yes. And I said, okay, well, have a seat. So I call up John and I said, John, how you doing? He goes, great. And I said, I understand one of your investors backed out. And he goes, yeah. I said, what do you think we should do to solve that problem, John? He said, well, I think you should just add the 7 million to the loan balance of the note you're carrying back. I said, that's a great idea, John. But I said, I'm not going to add 7. I'm going to add 42 million. And he goes, 42 million? He said, I'm sorry, I take that back. I said, I'm going to add 28 million. And he goes, 28 million? Well, why would I agree to that? I said, because the guy who backed out was going to make 42 million and I'm only charging you 28. So by the fact that he backed out and I'm only charging you 28, just made $12 million. That's why. He goes, okay, I like that. Fine, let's do that. And so I went back to the bank and I told the bank what happened and they just couldn't comprehend it. They just couldn't. The guy was $7 million short and you charged him 28 million and he agreed to it. And I said, yeah. And they said, we don't understand how you did that. And I said, don't worry, we got it done. And they said, we're so appreciative about you doing that. We're going to give you access to any of our non-performing loans that you would like to buy from us. And I said, great. I picked one, which was a big land deal down on the ocean in Southern California, and I ended up making a 3x on that and over a relatively short period of time. So it just goes to show you using how it all started off with don't assume things, and then using the other C's of choice and creativity, it just ended up with a great outcome.
That's such a brilliant story. And like you say, it comes from not making an assumption to start with, but also, Hugh, your mind, it fascinates me. Like, as you said, most people were watching on, oh, well, we just need to fix the 7 million. And what you did is you saw a whole opportunity out there. You were so creative. It actually made sense to people. And they're like, oh, okay, yeah, sure, I'll make that extra. And that is.
Yeah, so you're right. Nobody could comprehend it, and that's just kind of the way my brain works. It's just I'm like a very curious, creative little entity.
Out of the box.
So it works. With things happen that I just look back on it and go like, "Whoa, okay, that's pretty cool."
Let's it's more than cool. But you talked of the 6 C's. Now I know of them, but let's run through them for people so that they can write it down and make sure that they are honing in on that in their business life and personal life, I actually think.
Yeah, it works in business, your personal life, everything. So the first C is choice, because everything starts with a choice. So you can choose to either do something or become so fearful you're afraid of failing, so you don't do anything, that's not a Great choice. So, and the second one is curiosity. That's really important. The curiosity and creativity are really important for a lot of people because if you're right-handed, you're not innately curious and creative. That's something you're more analytical and routine driven. So, because that's the way the brain works. So, it's really important if you're right-handed that you consciously make efforts to be curious and creative. And a lot of my successes in business and real estate initially stemmed out of curiosity and creativity. And the most interesting thing is when I gave a speech to like 6,000 people in South Africa with JT, after I finished, the wealthiest person in South Africa gave a speech. And then somebody in the audience asked him, what is the single attribute that you attribute your success to? And his answer was curiosity. So that's really, I think, just amplifies how important it is to be curious and creative. And so the first three, the fourth is commitment. So when you start something, you need to see it through, and you're going to have difficulties along the way, but there are tools to address those difficulties. And so you can see something to its end. The fifth is compassion, and that's really played a key role in a lot of my successes because you can't do everything on your own. You need a great team, and you're only going to have a great team if you're a compassionate person and are sensitive to other people's needs and desires and wants. So, and the last is communication. And there's a great book on that to read as well. It's called The Credibility Code. And to be effective in business and in your personal life, it's really important to be an effective communicator. The book covers all aspects of communication, from written communication to verbal communication to nonverbal communication. And then once you have that, and the last is listening, because that's part of communication too. So you have to become an effective listener. So that's a great book to help everyone that's podcasting.
I've definitely written that one down because I'm big on communications. My thing is people are your superpowers. So I'm about empowering teams because you go to work every day and, you spend so much of your life, 70% of your life, like at work. So it's so important that you enjoy what you're doing. Now, with all of these ventures and deals and things that you've done a lot of big turnarounds too, which means you've probably come into companies that have maybe had their culture a bit ripped apart and everything like that. Do you have any advice? Because I've had quite a few entrepreneurs lately coming and I'm doing some speeches on it. But how do you get a disengaged team to buy into, say, your new vision? Because you're coming along and going, right, I need to turn you around. I need to get you from here to somewhere where you've never seen.
Right. I think a lot of it goes back to, again, the 6 C's. You have to have compassion. For example, when I took over a large restaurant conglomerate, one of my restaurant chains was Chi-Chi's, that you know all about Chi-Chi's. And so what was fascinating about Chi-Chi's is that corporate never reached out to get any input from any of the employees. So the first thing I did is I called everybody back to corporate to get their input because they were the closest to the customer. And once they felt important and that management cared about their opinions and ideas, then everybody became engaged. And that was a really important aspect of doing it. So you need to be compassionate and you need to listen and encourage people to be the best version possible of who they are. And you'd be surprised by just being nice and engaging and non-judgmental. That's a huge one. Non-judgmental. Because people can sense that really quickly if they're being judged. And then when they do something great, you need to compliment them on it. I mean, it just happened today where one of my employees were working on one of our real estate projects and we had to do something regarding an access issue and we agreed to it. And then he went home and finished doing it last night and sent it to the owner of the adjacent property. And so this morning I came in and I complimented him. I said, hey, I was over and above. I really appreciate the fact that you did it last night because it was after hours. And I want you to understand that I appreciate that. And it's worthy in terms of complimenting you on it. So it's being an effective communicator, I think, Kristina.
And also acknowledging. I love that. Effective communication and just acknowledging. And you need to feed the ego a little bit so people feel like they've got a purpose and that they're not coming in and just feeding the pockets of the owners. So there have been a lot of gold nuggets in here, Hugh Hilton.
Thank you,
I really do appreciate it. I love speaking to you every time. Your stories just light me up and just your energy is electric. So what's a parting word from you to everyone of what they should do right now once they get off their podcast listening, and we can leave them with that?
I think people should have fun in terms of what they're doing. And if they're not having fun, they need to change what they're doing and how they're doing it. I always tell people, remember when we were little kids and we were playing with other little kids? If we weren't having fun, we didn't continue doing it. We just got up and walked over and started doing something else. And when I talk to people, it's so interesting. I talked about their jobs and they're really not having fun. I'm going like, well, you need to do something different then to create some fun in your life, because we're only here for a certain amount of time. And it isn't all about the money, because if it was all about the money, you'd be able to take it with you when you leave, and you're not taking any of that stuff with you. So, look to a bigger reason for enjoying your life.
Oh, that is great. I love ending on fun, because I am wholeheartedly with you. If you're not enjoying it and having fun along the way, what is the point?
Exactly.
Thank you so much, Hugh.
My
Your time is so valuable. I've had such a great conversation.
Likewise.
And thank you for being on Transforming the Game.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.